Gartner research now predicts the number of IoT devices in use will hit 14.2 billion in 2019 and grow to 25 billion in 2021. Behind the scenes, working with the technology and building out IoT applications, are teams of developers dedicated to creating innovative solutions. But will there be enough developers to keep pace with the demands of IoT? Many experts note that businesses are struggling to recruit employees with the skills needed to make the Internet of Things a true success. So, what can be done to help with these challenges? One idea gaining some traction is to make the development process more efficient by bringing together DevOps and IoT to accelerate the software development lifecycle. In this program, we'll take a close look at the benefits and challenges of adopting DevOps methodologies for IoT. By viewing this program, development professionals will gain insight and understanding as to how DevOps can bring improved quality, security, and reliability to IoT applications. This program features DevOps expert Bob Aiello, lead consultant at CM Best Practices Consulting. Aiello is the author of the book Configuration Management Best Practices: Practical Methods That Work in the Real World. He has served as the vice chair of the IEEE 828 Standards Working Group and is a member of the IEEE Software and Systems Engineering Standards Committee Management Board. There are several teaching points in this program. First, a discussion about the critical nature of today's IoT landscape. Next, the advantages of bringing DevOps methodologies to IoT solutions development. Then, a look at the challenges developers face when creating IoT solutions. We'll then conclude with a look to the future and best practices to get started using a DevOps approach for IoT. Now, let's begin our report. IoT has a growing presence in business and industry today, from manufacturing and supply chain to agriculture and healthcare. In fact, in a recent McKinsey survey of business leaders about IoT adoption, 98% of respondents stated that most companies within their industry include enterprise IoT initiatives in their strategic roadmaps. The survey respondents also indicated that improving service operations, increasing visibility into operations, enabling new business models, and creating new product and service offerings as the prime areas where IoT solutions would be of most benefit. Now, with those facts in mind, let's turn to our guest expert, Bob Aiello, consultant and technical editor for CM Crossroads, as he offers his perspectives on IoT and why it matters.
IoT is becoming an incredibly prevalent technology that we see impacting every aspect of our lives these days. The Internet of Things is what we're calling it, but it's actually broader than that. We're talking about connected devices, from the heating systems that you find everywhere you go, from a store to your home, to different types of devices that impact the way we drive, commute. There are so many different specialized devices that are communicating with each other, often through the internet, but perhaps through other protocols as well, that the Internet of Things is becoming a prevalent technology with a lot of complexity to it and really having an incredible impact on our day-to-day lives.
We asked Aiello where DevOps and configuration management fit into the picture.
Well, at its very basis, an IoT device is really a small computer. It's got hardware, often specialized hardware, and it's got a fair amount of software, often with significant constraints on the amount of memory and disk. So DevOps and configuration management end up becoming really essential in terms of how we manage the software that's loaded onto those devices, how we update it, how we make sure it's secure and operating effectively. So these IoT devices, they have a lot of vulnerabilities, and it's really important to have the right practices in place so that the software loaded onto them does what it needs to do, and that any other types of anomalies, whether they be hardware or software related, are identified and addressed.
Since more and more software development teams are bringing together DevOps and IoT, we asked Aiello about how the DevOps approach can help IoT.
Well, the IoT devices have specialized purposes, but their software and even sometimes the hardware has to be updated on a pretty frequent basis. If you think about your Wi-Fi routers or even cameras that govern the way we drive our cars, all of those devices have to be updated from time to time. Plus, you have a risk of some malfunction causing either the hardware or the software to not be as it should be. So DevOps and configuration management becomes an essential aspect of monitoring the device, making sure that it maintains the right configuration, and then allows us to update it with new features as we need to.
McKinsey Global Institute estimates there are 127 new devices connected to the Internet every second, and that consumers now own an average of 4 IoT devices that communicate with the cloud. The annual economic impact of all this, according to McKinsey, could amount to $11 trillion by the year 2025. However, with all that good news, the IoT world still has its significant challenges. For example, concerns about security and privacy are two of the most critical issues with the IoT. Both consumers and businesses must take the time to completely understand and weigh the benefits and risks when it comes to the security of private data and information that comes to light through IoT. Let's return to expert Bob Aiello as he discusses what it means to be a connected device.
So a very good example of that is all the telecom that we have out there. We have routers, we have switches, we have lots of different devices that govern big voice and communication systems. So that's often a pretty complicated example of an IoT device. But there's also simpler examples. You might have those red light cameras. You might have Wi-Fi devices in your home. You might even have cameras for your smart house. So all of those devices are a combination of specialized hardware as well as software. And the real challenge is with limited memory and storage, maintaining the software and the operating capability of those devices ends up being pretty challenging. DevOps, as it turns out, gives us a lot of key features to monitor those devices, update them if they need to be updated, and then configuration management allows us to ensure that they're communicating correctly, we have the right interfaces, the right protocols, and also the configuration settings are as they should be.
Aiello then talked about what it means for things to be on the Internet.
The concept of the Internet of Things is actually simple in some ways and complicated in others. And when I first heard about it, I had to take a step back and really think about it. And one of the things that I think is most important to understand is that all of the devices we're talking about are small computers. They have limited storage, they have limited memory, but there's often an operating system on them. If not, there's some type of software that maintains the device connectivity. So these are specialized devices, but they have to be maintained. They have to be configured. The settings may need to change. They operate on the Internet in many cases, though not all. Sometimes there are other communication protocols. But the Internet ends up being an excellent way for these devices to communicate and for us also to be able to monitor them and be able to respond to the information we get back from them.
According to experts, connected devices are literally changing the way the world does business. IoT already enables enterprises to lower operating costs, increase productivity, efficiency, expand to new markets, and develop new products, and we're just getting started. Bob Aiello talked about the advantages of connected devices.
For example, autonomous cars or planes and trains, a lot of the devices that are on major transportation systems really need the capability to be connected, in part because of the capabilities around GPS, but also in terms of control and reporting back whether or not the device is functioning correctly. So if you think about it today, how could you possibly fly a plane these days without having the GPS services, without having the connectivity back to control? And sometimes things as simple as being able to have Wi-Fi while you're on the plane is really important.
When it comes to technology change, there are always challenges. Aiello talked about several IoT stumbling blocks.
Well, the first challenge with any IoT device is that it's often a soft target for hackers. So there have been numerous instances where cameras have been hijacked and actually used as an attack vehicle for a denial of service attack. So all of these IoT devices, in many cases, they don't have enough software and hardware capabilities to defend themselves. So we have to have an outside way to monitor the device and make sure that it's performing as it should. And then if it's been hijacked and something has been done to that device, we have to be able to put the software baseline back on it and fix it. So DevOps and configuration management end up being two really key capabilities that allow us to make sure that those devices are functioning as they should be. And the more complicated they get, obviously the more danger there is of some type of anomaly happening, and our capabilities have to be just as sharp so that we can keep those devices working as they should be. So I'll tell you one personal experience I had, my old GPS device. I mean, these days we all use our smartphones, but years ago I had a specialized device, just a GPS device, and when I did the update to it, it stopped working. It wasn't really capable of taking the updates that were being offered. It literally ran out of memory, and it couldn't find its way back. So sometimes these devices really are pretty hard to be able to maintain. So DevOps and configuration management can help with making sure that we can update the software correctly and maintain, and then most importantly, monitor those devices. Now, if those devices are not correctly managed, they may not perform in a timely fashion. You can have some latency or other types of behaviors that malfunction. So it turns out to be very important to be able to measure the response time and be certain that the device is performing as it should be. So monitor and control, being able to turn on the lights in our home as we're arriving home, being able to turn up the heat, being able to monitor what's going on, identify if there are any type of problems. For example, your home security system, many of those are basically IoT devices, right? So you want to be able to see if someone's in your home, if there's any motion. It might be, one of your relatives popping in that you didn't know was going to be there, or it could be somebody who's an intruder. So you want to be able to tell from those devices what's going on there without just calling the 911 every single time. So the IoT devices give you specialized capabilities, but they also present some challenges in terms of being able to monitor and control them. So the key aspect to this is understanding the protocols and the configuration management. There are standard protocols for those devices to communicate, to be able to send information back, and there's also standard protocols to be able to control them, to update them, to turn them on, to turn them off, and ensure that they are functioning as they should be. If you start to think about how this affects connected trains and planes and cars, we start to get into an area that's known as safety, and the security and reliability of those IoT devices becomes a major concern.
Experts have reported that IoT architecture can complicate things a bit for DevOps, especially when it comes to deployment. We asked Bob Aiello for his thoughts on that issue.
So IoT devices, even though they're often small and specialized, can in fact be very complicated. Part of the problem is you have to think about both the hardware and the software, and a lot of us DevOps guys are spoiled focusing mostly on software and almost taking the hardware for granted, particularly in a cloud-based environment. But in an IoT world, the hardware is a first-class citizen, and a lot of times you may be updating the circuit chip as well as the firmware on that chip. So you really have to think about both the hardware and the software and its interaction, as well as how that device connects to other devices. So many of these IoT devices exist within an ecosystem. Think about your home security system. You may have a device that's on a door. You may have other motion sensors in the house. You may have connectivity to lighting systems. Each of these devices has their own capabilities, but they exist within a complete ecosystem, a complete system.
It's estimated that approximately 4.4 trillion gigabytes of data will be generated via the Internet of Things by the year 2020. Big data analytics plays a key role in analyzing IoT-generated data, revealing new trends and patterns that can significantly improve business decision-making. Expert Aiello talked about the value of big data.
So one of the really interesting areas of IoT devices is the information they yield on consumer behavior. If you think about the cameras and the different devices that help us run our transportation systems, they actually start to yield a lot of interesting information on consumer behavior. Where are the traffic problems that are out there? You may find that your GPS device starts to route you around traffic delays. You may find that they start to help us deal with energy consumption. There are some smart cities where they look at traffic patterns and they're able to adjust the cameras and lighting so that the city itself is able to use energy more efficiently. So big data, providing information about consumer behavior, is yielded from many of these IoT devices, and there's obviously privacy concerns as well, but the potential to understand and achieve real benefit from the data that IoT devices provides is really significant.
Today, the threat of cyber attacks cannot be ignored, and IoT brings with it new cybersecurity risks for developers to consider. Our guest expert talked about IoT's cybersecurity challenges.
So it turns out a lot of the techniques that we have to use are basically DevOps 101, which is good news. So the first thing is we have to make sure that we've got a secure baseline of our code, that we're using cryptography, things like cryptographic hashes like Max SHA-1 and MD5, so that we can accurately identify the software on that device and definitively prove that it's the exact version that should be there. And if it's been tampered with, most importantly, be able to identify that that baseline is not what it should be, and then have an external device slap the proper code back on, so that device essentially is self-healing. So DevOps and configuration management are giving us the capabilities to really manage these complicated IoT devices and make sure that they are secure, identify if there are problems. If that camera has been hijacked and is being used for some other purpose, we have to have an external monitor that device, help us identify the problem, and get it back exactly where it should be. So monitoring ends up being a really key aspect of this. And DevOps focuses a lot on good monitoring techniques. So does configuration management. In many ways, they're overlapping in this space quite a bit. So it's very important to always be ensuring that your IoT devices are functioning as they should be. And you also got to realize many of these IoT devices are soft targets. They can be penetrated, they can be attacked by hackers, they can be hijacked for other purposes. And being able to defend those devices, a lot of times the device itself doesn't have enough memory and storage to be able to have its own security on the device itself. So you need some outside monitor to make sure that the cameras have not been hijacked, to make sure that the devices inside the car are operating as it should be. And obviously there's real safety concerns here. If you've got autonomous vehicles and we manage to get in through the Wi-Fi connection that is used to update the software in the autonomous vehicle, obviously that type of safety concern is very important. Same thing with connected trains and connected planes. So with all these devices, while we have the beauty of the connectivity and the advantages and the capabilities there, we also have some risks that we have to address. And DevOps and configuration management really do shine as being the techniques that allow us to manage these risks and ensure that we get the benefit from those devices while still understanding the risk and mitigating those risks.
So, are you ready to get started and use a DevOps approach for IoT? Bob Aiello offers this advice.
So in all cases, I always start by doing an assessment. I always ask teams, what are your existing practices? And sometimes I find that they've got some gaps, but most of the time I find there's good reason why they got to where they are. But I always start with an assessment. What are your current practices? And what I find in IoT that's a little different is when the devices first went out there, they had very small well-identified purposes, so the procedures could be pretty basic. Now they're getting more complicated. Again, they exist within an ecosystem, so there's a lot of complexity there. So I start to have to develop techniques that manage those dependencies, identify any anomalies that occur, and have a good strategy to be able to address them when they in fact do occur. So I think in IoT, what we see is that we're starting with a smaller scale, but then we're quickly building up to a level of complexity that ends up being pretty tough to be able to manage. So you really have to make sure that you're addressing those concerns. You're understanding the whole architecture, the whole ecosystem. And DevOps brings the practice of ensuring that we talk with all the right stakeholders to get their different views. So you have your hardware engineers and you have your software engineers. Very often they're siloed. And DevOps gives us the right practices to be able to get input from each of those experts and be able to ensure that we can handle that complexity.
In today's report, Exploring DevOps for IoT, we discuss the critical nature of today's IoT landscape. We then considered advantages of bringing DevOps methodologies to IoT solutions development and identified some of the challenges developers face when creating IoT solutions. In addition, we presented best practices to follow for development teams who are new to DevOps with IoT. Next, we'll conclude as expert Bob Aiello talks about DevOps and the evolution of IoT.
IoT is very much supported by DevOps and configuration management, and there's no way that they would be successful without those practices in place. And you see that with the devices that you buy for home use, and then 6 months later, you can't even update them, you can't even use them because they don't have the right practices in place. So when we're talking about a production environment, those cameras that are helping govern how traffic flows, connected cars, connected planes, connected trucks, each of these different devices has to have the right practices in place to be able to handle the production usage and all the challenges that occur out in the real world. But I think that the industry is maturing to realize that. I think we're starting to see more standards emerge and more capabilities to be able to handle these production devices. And the limits and the capabilities that we're seeing are really incredible. So these IoT devices really, they're all around us already, but they're going to have a greater impact in the future.
Aiello concluded the interview with a look to the future of DevOps and IoT.
Well, I see them maturing. I see these best practices becoming more standard. I see a lot more focus on industry standards from a lot of the standards vendors. And I see a lot more awareness that we have to have best practices in place. We have to have the capability to update these systems, to be able to monitor them, to be able to manage them. I think they're very pervasive, but a lot of the practices are still being developed. And I think we're going to see pretty soon a maturity of these practices, and our capabilities to support them will grow and improve.
That concludes our report, Exploring DevOps for IoT. We'd like to thank our guest expert, Bob Aiello, for sharing his expertise and advice on this critically important topic. This is Michael Quinlan reporting. Thanks for watching.